The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan valley as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his tactical gear one final time. His SEAL team had been operating in this hostile region for 3 weeks, gathering intelligence on a high-value target known only as the Ghost. The enemy commander had been responsible for coordinating attacks that claimed the lives of dozens of coalition forces, and today's mission would finally bring him to justice. Morrison looked at his team of 8 elite operators. Each man had trained for years to reach this moment. Petty Officer First Class Danny Rodriguez checked his sniper rifle for the 100th time that morning. Sergeant Mike Chin tested his radio equipment, ensuring clear communication with base command. The youngest member of the team, Petty Officer Second Class Tyler Brooks, barely 22 years old, examined his medical supplies with the precision of a surgeon. "Listen up," Morrison said quietly as the team gathered in a tight circle. "Intelligence confirms the Ghost is holding a meeting with regional cell leaders at the compound 3 clicks northeast. We move in at 0800 hours. Rodriguez, you'll take overwatch position on the ridge line. Chun, maintain comms with base. Brooks, you stay close to me. Everyone else, standard breach and clear protocol." The compound they were targeting sat in a valley surrounded by steep rocky hills and dense vegetation along a fast-moving river. It was an ideal defensive position, which explained why the Ghost had chosen it for his secret meeting. The intelligence reports indicated at least 20 enemy combatants would be present, all heavily armed and experienced fighters. As the team moved through the rugged terrain, each operator remained hypervigilant. They had learned from experience that in Afghanistan, danger could emerge from anywhere at any moment. The rocky landscape provided excellent cover for enemy snipers, and improvised explosive devices were a constant threat along any path. Rodriguez found his overwatch position on a rocky outcrop that provided a clear view of the compound below. Through his scope, he could see armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Several vehicles were parked outside the main building, confirming that the meeting was indeed taking place. He radioed his observations to Morrison, who was leading the assault team toward their entry point. "Overwatch in position," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "I count 12 tangos outside the building. Multiple vehicles confirm high-value targets are present." Morrison acknowledged the report and signaled his team to advance. They moved with the fluid precision that comes from countless hours of training together. Each operator knew exactly what his teammates would do in any situation, creating an almost telepathic level of coordination. The assault began precisely at 0800 hours. Morrison's team breached the compound's outer perimeter while Rodriguez provided covering fire from his elevated position. The initial moments went according to plan. Enemy guards were neutralized quickly and efficiently before they could raise an alarm. But as the team advanced toward the main building, the situation began to deteriorate rapidly. The intelligence reports had been wrong. Instead of 20 enemy combatants, there were at least 40 heavily armed fighters waiting for them. It became clear that the Ghost had somehow learned of the operation and prepared an ambush. "Contact! Contact!" Chun shouted into his radio as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the compound. The SEAL team found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire with limited cover. Morrison immediately began coordinating his team's response while bullets whistled past their heads. "Rodriguez, I need suppressing fire on that machine gun nest at 2 o'clock. Chun, call for air support immediately." The young medic, Tyler Brooks, stayed close to Morrison as ordered, but his eyes constantly scanned for wounded teammates who might need immediate medical attention. Despite being the youngest and least experienced member of the team, Brooks had proven himself reliable under pressure during previous operations. Rodriguez adjusted his position and began engaging enemy targets with deadly accuracy. His rifle barked repeatedly as he eliminated threats one by one. But for every enemy fighter he neutralized, 2 more seemed to appear from concealed positions around the compound. "Sir, we've got a problem," Chin reported grimly. "Air support is 20 minutes out, and we're taking heavy fire from multiple directions." These guys knew we were coming. Morrison realized they had walked into a carefully planned trap. The Ghost had used the intelligence about his own meeting as bait to lure the SEAL team into a kill zone. Enemy fighters were positioned throughout the compound and surrounding hills, creating interlocking fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was actually only 20 minutes. The SEAL team's superior training and equipment allowed them to hold their position, but they were clearly outnumbered and outgunned. Several team members had sustained minor wounds, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. We need to fall back to secondary extraction point, Morrison decided. The original extraction site was now completely compromised, covered by enemy machine gun positions that would make helicopter landing impossible. As the team began their tactical withdrawal, enemy forces pressed their attack even harder. It became clear that the Ghost intended to eliminate the entire SEAL unit and claim a major propaganda victory. Enemy fighters emerged from concealed positions, attempting to cut off the Americans' escape route. The secondary extraction point was located near the river that ran through the valley bottom. It offered better cover and multiple escape routes if the helicopter couldn't land. But reaching it would require the team to cross nearly half a mile of open ground while under constant enemy fire. Rodriguez provided covering fire as long as possible, but eventually had to abandon his overwatch position when enemy fighters began climbing the ridge to assault his location. He rejoined the main team just as they reached the river's edge, where they established a defensive perimeter while waiting for extraction. Extraction helicopter is inbound, 5 minutes out, Chen reported. But even as he spoke, enemy fire intensified from all directions. The Taliban fighters had surrounded their position and were closing in for the final assault. Morrison assessed their situation grimly. 5 minutes might as well be 5 hours given the intensity of enemy fire they were receiving. Their ammunition was nearly exhausted, and several team members were wounded. The extraction helicopter would be flying into a hornet's nest of enemy fire. "Sir," Brooks said quietly, "maybe we should cross the river. Put some distance between us and these guys." Morrison shook his head. "Too risky. That water's moving fast, and we don't know how deep it is. If we get caught in the current while they're shooting at us." The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder, but so did the enemy gunfire. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves on all the high ground surrounding the river position. They had rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns, more than enough firepower to shoot down the rescue helicopter. Rodriguez set up his rifle again and began engaging enemy positions, but there were simply too many targets. "I'm down to my last magazine," he called out. Chun tried desperately to coordinate with the incoming helicopter and base command. "We need immediate air support at these coordinates. The landing zone is too hot for extraction." Young Brooks worked frantically to treat wounded team members while bullets struck the rocks around them. Despite the chaos and danger, he remained focused on his medical duties, applying pressure bandages and administering pain medication with steady hands. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Ground team, this is Rescue Bird. I can see your position, but there's too much enemy fire for a safe landing. I'm going to have to circle back and wait for air support to clear the area." Morrison felt his heart sink. They couldn't hold this position much longer with their dwindling ammunition and increasing number of wounded. The enemy was getting closer, and some Taliban fighters had already crossed the river upstream to attack from the opposite bank. "We're completely surrounded," Rodriguez reported grimly as he fired his last few rounds. "They've got us boxed in from all sides." The situation had become desperate. 8 elite SEAL operators, the best trained special forces in the world, were about to be overrun by a superior enemy force. All their years of training and previous successful missions seemed meaningless in the face of this perfectly executed ambush. Morrison grabbed his radio for what he thought might be his final transmission. The words that came next would echo in the minds of everyone who heard them. "Base, this is Team Leader Morrison. We are surrounded and low on ammunition. Enemy forces closing from all directions." He paused, looking at his brave teammates who were still fighting despite the hopeless situation. "It's over." But as those words left his lips, Morrison had no idea that their salvation was about to emerge from the most unexpected source. Somewhere in the rushing waters of the river behind them, a young Afghan boy had been watching the entire battle unfold. And unlike every other Afghan in the valley that day, this teenager had no intention of letting the American soldiers die. The boy had been fishing in the river when the shooting started. Instead of fleeing like any sensible person would do, he had hidden among the rocks and observed the battle with growing concern. He recognized that the Americans were the same soldiers who had helped his village several weeks earlier, providing medical care for sick children and supplies for families in need. Now those same soldiers were about to die, surrounded by Taliban fighters who had brought nothing but fear and suffering to his region. The boy made a decision that would change everything. He reached for his father's old hunting rifle, hidden in a waterproof case beneath some rocks. At only 17 years old, Ahmad Hassan was already known throughout his village as the best marksman for miles around. His father had taught him to hunt in these mountains from the time he could hold a rifle. What the Taliban fighters surrounding the Americans didn't know was that they were about to face a local sniper who knew every rock, tree, and hiding spot in the valley better than they knew their own names. Ahmad Hassan crouched behind the large boulder that had concealed him from both the American soldiers and Taliban fighters. His hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped his father's rifle from the waterproof covering. The weapon was old but well-maintained, a Soviet-era sniper rifle that his father had captured during the war against the Russians decades earlier. The 17-year-old had been coming to this stretch of river since childhood. He knew every stone, every curve in the water, every tree along the banks. While the Taliban fighters were focused on the trapped Americans, they had no idea that someone was positioning himself behind them with deadly accuracy. Ahmad's father, Mahmud Hassan, had fought against the Soviets as a young mujahideen fighter. He had taught his son not just how to shoot, but how to think like a sniper. "Patience, my son," his father always said. "One perfect shot is worth 100 hasty ones. Study your target, know your surroundings, and never reveal your position until you are ready to disappear." The boy had learned those lessons well during countless hunting trips in these mountains. He could track deer through forest that would confuse experienced hunters. He could hit a moving target at distances that amazed village elders. But he had never shot at another human being. Today would be different. Through the rifle scope, Ahmad could see the American soldiers huddled behind rocks near the river's edge. They were clearly exhausted and running low on ammunition. Some were wounded and bleeding. The youngest one, barely older than Ahmad himself, was working frantically to treat injuries while bullets flew overhead. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves expertly around the trapped Americans. Ahmad counted at least 30 enemy combatants, many more than the 8 American soldiers. They were moving closer, preparing for a final assault that would surely kill every member of the SEAL team. But the Taliban fighters had made one critical mistake. In their confidence about surrounding the Americans, they had not posted guards to watch the river behind them. They assumed no threat would come from that direction, since the swift current would make crossing dangerous and the rocky banks provided little cover. Ahmad studied the enemy positions carefully. 3 Taliban fighters had set up a machine gun on a ridge overlooking the Americans. They were the greatest immediate threat, raking the SEAL position with sustained automatic fire. If Ahmad could eliminate them, it might give the Americans enough breathing room to reposition. The teenager adjusted his rifle scope and controlled his breathing exactly as his father had taught him. The first Taliban fighter came into his crosshairs. Ahmad's fingers slowly tightened on the trigger. For a moment, he hesitated. Once he fired this shot, there would be no going back. The Taliban would know someone was shooting at them from the river, and they would hunt him down mercilessly. But then, Ahmad remembered the day 3 weeks ago when these same American soldiers had visited his village. His little sister had been sick with fever, and the American medic had provided medicine that probably saved her life. The Americans had also given food supplies to families who were struggling to survive. They had treated the villagers with respect and kindness, very different from the Taliban fighters who demanded tribute and threatened anyone who opposed them. The decision became clear. Ahmad squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley as the first Taliban machine gunner fell instantly. His 2 companions looked around in confusion, trying to understand where the shot had come from. Before they could identify the threat, Ahmad's second shot dropped the machine gun operator. The third fighter attempted to grab the weapon, but Ahmad's third shot ended that threat as well. The sudden silence from the machine gun position gave the Americans precious seconds to reposition themselves. Lieutenant Commander Morrison immediately took advantage of the unexpected reprieve, moving his team to better cover among the rocks. Where the hell did that come from? Rodriguez muttered as he peered through his scope, trying to identify their mysterious ally. Ahmad had already moved to a new position, just as his father had taught him. He low-crawled through the river reeds to a different vantage point 50 yards downstream. From this new location, he could see another group of Taliban fighters preparing to assault the Americans from the opposite flank. The enemy commander was shouting orders in Pashto, trying to reorganize his forces after the unexpected loss of the machine gun team. Ahmad understood every word. The Taliban leader was ordering his men to advance on the American position from 3 directions simultaneously. It would be a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the remaining SEAL defenders. But the Taliban commander had not counted on facing a local fighter who understood the terrain better than anyone else in the valley. Ahmad had played in these hills since childhood. He knew secret paths through the rocks that were invisible to outsiders. He could move from position to position without being detected, striking like a ghost, and then vanishing. The young Afghan lined up his next shot on an enemy fighter who was carrying rocket-propelled grenades. The RPGs posed the greatest threat to the American soldiers, capable of destroying their rocky cover with a single well-placed shot. Ahmad's bullet found its mark, and the Taliban fighter fell backward into the river with his deadly cargo. Now the enemy fighters began to realize they were under attack from an unknown sniper. They started looking around frantically, trying to locate this new threat. Some fired wildly at the riverbank, but their shots went wide because they had no idea where Ahmad was positioned. The confusion gave Morrison's team another opportunity to improve their situation. "Somebody's helping us out here," the SEAL leader told his men. "I don't know who it is, but let's not waste the chance. Chun, try to raise that helicopter again. Rodriguez, see if you can spot our mystery shooter." Ahmad had moved again, this time to a position upstream where fallen logs provided excellent camouflage. Through his scope, he could see a group of 5 Taliban fighters attempting to flank the Americans by crossing the river at a shallow point. They were moving carefully from rock to rock, staying low to avoid detection. The teenager waited until all 5 enemy fighters were in the middle of the river, where they would be most vulnerable. The swift current made their footing unstable, and they were focused on not falling into the water. Ahmad took careful aim at the lead fighter and fired. The shot struck the Taliban fighter's center mass, and he fell forward into the rushing water. His companions watched in horror as the current carried their leader's body downstream. They tried to retreat to the riverbank, but Ahmad was ready for them. His second shot dropped another fighter into the water. The remaining 3 scrambled desperately for cover, but the rocky river bed offered little protection from Ahmad's elevated position. Within minutes, all 5 enemy fighters were either dead or wounded and being swept away by the current. The Taliban's flanking maneuver had been completely destroyed by a single teenage sniper they couldn't even see. The enemy commander was becoming increasingly frustrated and desperate. He shouted orders for his remaining fighters to spread out and search for the hidden sniper. Several Taliban fighters began moving along the riverbank, firing at anything that looked like potential cover. But Ahmad had anticipated this response. He had already positioned himself in a natural cave behind a waterfall, where the sound of rushing water would mask his rifle shots, and the spray would make him nearly invisible. His father had shown him this hiding spot years ago during a hunting trip. From the cave, Ahmad had a perfect view of the Taliban fighters searching for him along the riverbank. They were moving predictably, checking obvious hiding spots while remaining bunched together. It was exactly the kind of tactical error that his father had warned him enemy fighters often made when they were angry and frustrated. Ahmad waited patiently as the Taliban search party moved closer to his position. When they were approximately 100 yards away, he began picking them off one by one. His first shot eliminated the lead fighter. His second shot dropped the man bringing up the rear. The fighters in the middle found themselves trapped between the river and Ahmad's hidden position. The remaining Taliban fighters panicked and ran back toward their main force, abandoning their search for the mysterious sniper. Ahmad's tactical superiority was becoming clear to everyone in the valley. He was using the terrain and his intimate knowledge of the area to devastating effect against enemy forces who were fighting on unfamiliar ground. Meanwhile, the American soldiers had used the breathing room provided by Ahmad's intervention to reorganize their defense and treat their wounded more effectively. Tyler Brooks, the young Navy medic, had managed to stabilize the most seriously injured team members. Chun had re-established communication with the extraction helicopter and base command. Air support is still 15 minutes out, Chun reported to Morrison. But the helicopter pilot says he might be able to attempt extraction if we can suppress more of that enemy fire. Morrison nodded grimly. Even with their mysterious allies' help, they were still outnumbered and surrounded. The Taliban commander still had at least 20 fighters remaining, and more enemy reinforcements were probably on their way to the valley. Ahmad could see the situation from his concealed position behind the waterfall. The Americans were holding their ground, but they needed more than just sniper support to survive this engagement. The Taliban fighters were regrouping and preparing for another coordinated assault that would be much harder to stop. The teenager made a decision that would have shocked his father and terrified his mother. Instead of remaining in his safe hiding spot, Ahmad decided to leave the cave and move closer to the main battle area. He would position himself where he could provide more direct support to the trapped Americans, even though it would put him at much greater personal risk. But first, Ahmad had one more surprise for the Taliban forces. Hidden near his cave was a cache of explosives that his father had buried years earlier during the Soviet War. The old weapons and ammunition had been forgotten by everyone except Ahmad, who had discovered them during a childhood exploration of the riverbank. The explosives were old, but still functional. Ahmad quickly rigged a simple booby trap along the path where Taliban reinforcements would most likely approach the battle area. When enemy fighters came down that trail, they would trigger an explosion that would eliminate several more threats and create additional confusion in their ranks. Ahmad slung his rifle across his back and began moving through the river reeds toward a position that would put him much closer to the fighting. He was about to escalate his involvement in this battle far beyond anything he had originally planned. The scared teenager who had been fishing peacefully that morning was transforming into a determined young warrior fighting to save the lives of soldiers who had shown kindness to his people. Ahmad moved through the tall river grass like a shadow, his father's rifle clutched tightly in his hands. Every step took him closer to danger, but also closer to the trapped American soldiers who needed his help. The teenager's heart pounded as he heard the Taliban commander shouting orders to his remaining fighters, organizing them for what would surely be a final devastating assault. The young Afghan found a new position among a cluster of large rocks that had tumbled down from the mountainside during some ancient landslide. From here, he was only 200 yards from the American defensive position, close enough to provide immediate covering fire, but still concealed from enemy observation. Through his rifle scope, Ahmad could see the faces of individual SEAL team members clearly now. The medic was still working frantically on wounded soldiers, his hands covered in blood, but his movements steady and professional. The team leader kept glancing at his watch, probably calculating how much time remained before their ammunition ran out completely. The Taliban commander had learned from his previous losses. Instead of exposing his fighters to the mysterious sniper, he was keeping them spread out and using cover more effectively. Ahmad counted approximately 18 enemy fighters still in the battle, and they were positioning themselves for coordinated attacks from multiple directions. But the Taliban leader had made one crucial miscalculation. In his focus on the Americans and the hidden sniper, he had forgotten about the path his reinforcements would use to reach the battle area. The explosive trap Ahmad had set was perfectly positioned to catch the next wave of enemy fighters. As if summoned by Ahmad's thoughts, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines echoed across the valley. The Taliban commander smiled grimly and spoke into his radio, coordinating with the approaching reinforcements. Ahmad estimated at least 6 more fighters were racing toward the battle on dirt bikes, heavily armed and eager to claim victory over the trapped Americans. The motorcycles came down the mountain trail exactly as Ahmad had predicted. The lead rider was moving fast, eager to join the fight and earn glory by killing American soldiers. He never saw the thin wire stretched across the path at handlebar height. The explosion shattered the morning air with tremendous force. The booby trap had worked perfectly, destroying the lead motorcycle and sending debris flying in all directions. The blast killed the first rider instantly and wounded 2 others who were following close behind. The remaining motorcycle riders stopped immediately, realizing they were riding into a trap. The explosion created exactly the distraction Ahmad had hoped for. Taliban fighters around the American position turned to look toward the blast, momentarily taking their attention away from their primary targets. Ahmad used those precious seconds to devastating effect. His first shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who had been preparing to throw a grenade at the Americans. The explosive device fell from the dying man's hand and detonated among his own comrades, killing 2 more enemy fighters and wounding several others. Ahmad's second shot dropped an enemy sniper who had been attempting to pick off individual SEAL team members. The Americans realized immediately that their mysterious ally had struck again. "Whoever this guy is, he just saved our asses," Rodriguez muttered as he watched Taliban fighters scrambling for better cover. Morrison seized the opportunity to coordinate with the extraction helicopter. "Rescue Bird, this is ground team. Unknown friendly is engaging enemy forces. Window might be opening for emergency extraction." The helicopter pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Copy that, ground team. I'm beginning my approach. Keep those bad guys' heads down for 60 more seconds." But 60 seconds was a lifetime in combat, and the Taliban commander was not giving up easily. He ordered his remaining fighters to ignore the mysterious sniper and focus everything on preventing American extraction. Enemy fighters began firing rocket-propelled grenades at the landing zone, trying to make it impossible for the helicopter to touch down. Ahmad could see the desperate situation unfolding below him. The Americans were brave and skilled, but they were simply overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. If the extraction helicopter couldn't land, every member of the SEAL team would die within the next few minutes. The teenager made a decision that would have terrified his parents and amazed his village elders. Instead of remaining in his concealed position, Ahmad stood up and began running directly toward the Taliban fighters, firing his rifle as he moved. It was an incredibly dangerous tactic, but it created maximum confusion among enemy forces who suddenly found themselves under attack from an unexpected direction. Ahmad's bold charge caught the Taliban fighters completely off guard. They had been focused on the Americans and had no idea where this new attacker had come from. The young Afghan's intimate knowledge of the terrain allowed him to move quickly through areas where enemy fighters would have struggled, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. His running attack eliminated 3 more Taliban fighters before they could react effectively. More importantly, it drew enemy fire away from the American position just as the extraction helicopter was making its final approach. The pilot needed every advantage he could get to land safely in the hostile landing zone. But Ahmad's heroic charge came at a price. A Taliban fighter armed with an AK-47 managed to get a clear shot at the running teenager. The bullet struck Ahmad in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground behind a fallen log. Pain shot through Ahmad's body as he felt blood soaking through his shirt. The wound was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. More importantly, he still had his rifle and several rounds of ammunition remaining. The fallen log provided good cover, and he was positioned where he could still observe enemy movements. The extraction helicopter was now hovering directly over the American position, with the pilot struggling to land while enemy fighters fired at his aircraft. Bullets struck the helicopter's armored hull, but the aircraft remained airworthy. The pilot was demonstrating remarkable skill and courage, holding his position despite intense enemy fire. "Go, go, go," Morrison shouted as he helped wounded team members toward the helicopter. The SEAL team began their desperate rush to the extraction point, carrying injured comrades while returning fire at Taliban positions. Ahmad knew this was the critical moment. If the Taliban fighters could maintain their fire on the helicopter for just a few more seconds, they might be able to shoot it down or force the pilot to abort the landing. The American soldiers would be trapped again, this time with even less ammunition and no hope of rescue. Despite his wound, Ahmad forced himself back into a firing position. Through his rifle scope, he could see a Taliban fighter preparing to fire an RPG at the helicopter. The rocket-propelled grenade would almost certainly destroy the aircraft and kill everyone aboard. Ahmad had one shot to prevent disaster. The teenager steadied his rifle against the fallen log, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. His breathing slowed as he acquired his target through the scope. The Taliban fighter was kneeling behind rocks, taking careful aim at the hovering helicopter. Ahmad's crosshairs settled on the enemy fighter's center mass. Time seemed to slow as Ahmad squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his wounded shoulder, sending fresh waves of pain through his body. But the shot was perfect. The Taliban fighter collapsed backward, his RPG flying harmlessly into the air as he fell. The Americans were now boarding the helicopter, with the strongest team members helping the wounded into the aircraft. Ahmad could see the young medic, Tyler Brooks, making sure every injured soldier was properly secured before climbing aboard himself. The SEAL team's discipline and brotherhood were evident even in this moment of desperate evacuation. But the Taliban fighters were making one final push to destroy the helicopter before it could take off. Enemy fighters emerged from cover all around the landing zone, firing everything they had at the American aircraft. The pilot was taking hits but maintaining his position heroically, giving his passengers every possible second to board safely. Ahmad realized he was the only thing standing between the SEAL team and annihilation. Despite his wound and exhaustion, he began firing as rapidly as possible at any Taliban fighter who posed a threat to the helicopter. His shots might not all be killing shots, but they were forcing enemy fighters to take cover instead of maintaining sustained fire on the aircraft. The helicopter's engines began to roar as the pilot prepared for emergency takeoff. All 8 American soldiers were aboard, along with their wounded. But the aircraft was dangerously overloaded and would struggle to gain altitude quickly while under fire. As the helicopter began to rise, Ahmad saw several Taliban fighters running toward better firing positions where they could track the ascending aircraft. The teenager forced himself to stand, despite the blood loss and pain, and began engaging these new threats with his remaining ammunition. One by one, Ahmad's shots found their marks. Taliban fighters fell as they tried to position themselves for final shots at the departing helicopter. The young Afghan was fighting with desperate determination, knowing that any enemy fighter he failed to neutralize might still have a chance to shoot down the rescue aircraft. The helicopter was now 50 feet off the ground and climbing steadily. The pilot had managed an incredible takeoff despite the hostile environment and aircraft damage. Through the aircraft's open door, Ahmad could see American soldiers looking back at the battlefield, probably wondering who had helped save their lives. Lieutenant Commander Morrison was staring down at the valley, trying to spot their mysterious ally. He could see muzzle flashes from the area where their unknown supporter was still engaging enemy fighters, but he couldn't make out any details about the person who had risked everything to help them. "Sir," Tyler Brooks said over the helicopter noise, "somebody down there just saved all our lives. Shouldn't we try to help him?" Morrison nodded grimly. "Mark these coordinates. We'll get air support here as soon as possible. Whoever our guardian angel is, we owe him everything." The helicopter disappeared over the ridge line, carrying the SEAL team to safety. Ahmad watched until the aircraft was completely out of sight, then slumped behind the fallen log as exhaustion and blood loss began to take their toll. He had fired his last bullet, but the Americans were safe. The remaining Taliban fighters were regrouping, realizing that their primary targets had escaped. Soon they would begin searching for the sniper who had cost them so many men and ruined their perfect ambush. Ahmad needed to disappear before they found him, but he wasn't sure he had the strength to move far with his wounded shoulder. The teenager looked at his father's rifle one last time before hiding it beneath some rocks. The weapon had served him well today, but carrying it would slow his escape and mark him as the sniper if he was captured. Ahmad began crawling toward the river, hoping the swift current would carry him far enough downstream to reach safety before the Taliban fighters found his position. Ahmad dragged himself toward the river's edge, each movement sending jolts of pain through his wounded shoulder. Behind him, he could hear Taliban fighters shouting as they began their search for the mysterious sniper who had destroyed their ambush and allowed the Americans to escape. The teenager knew he had only minutes before enemy fighters would discover his hiding spot near the fallen log. The river current was swift and dangerous, but it offered Ahmad's only chance of escape. His father had taught him to swim in these waters as a young boy, warning him about the hidden rocks and unpredictable currents that could trap even experienced swimmers. Today, those same dangerous waters might save his life. Ahmad slipped into the cold mountain water, gasping as the shock hit his wounded body. The current immediately grabbed him, pulling him downstream faster than he had expected. He struggled to keep his head above water, while the swift flow carried him away from the battlefield where he had just fought for his life. Behind him, Taliban fighters were spreading out along the riverbank, searching for any sign of their elusive enemy. Their commander was furious about the failed ambush and the loss of so many fighters to a single unknown sniper. He had ordered his men to find this ghost shooter and bring him back alive for interrogation and public execution. But Ahmad was already hundreds of yards downstream, fighting to control his movement through the rushing water. His shoulder wound was bleeding more heavily now, weakened by the exertion and cold water. The teenager knew he needed to reach the shore soon or risk losing consciousness and drowning in the river that was carrying him to safety. 2 miles downstream, Ahmad finally managed to grab a low-hanging tree branch and pull himself onto a muddy bank. He was exhausted, wounded, and soaking wet, but alive. More importantly, he was far enough from the battle site that the Taliban fighters would be unlikely to search this area immediately. The young Afghan found shelter beneath some overhanging rocks and tried to assess his situation. The bullet wound in his shoulder was still bleeding, but not as heavily as before. The cold river water had actually helped slow the blood loss. Ahmad used strips torn from his shirt to create a makeshift bandage, just as his father had taught him during hunting accidents in the mountains. As he rested in his hiding place, Ahmad thought about what had just happened. A few hours ago, he had been a simple village teenager fishing in the river. Now he was a wounded guerrilla fighter who had single-handedly saved an elite American military unit from annihilation. The transformation seemed impossible, like something from the action movies that occasionally played in the village. But Ahmad knew the consequences of his actions were very real. The Taliban commander would not forget or forgive what had happened today. Enemy fighters would search every village in the region, looking for anyone who might have helped the Americans. Ahmad's family and neighbors would all be in danger because of his decision to intervene in the battle. The teenager needed to return home and warn his family immediately. They would have to leave their village and seek shelter with relatives in distant areas where the Taliban had less influence. It would mean abandoning their farm, their animals, and everything they had worked to build over many years. But Ahmad felt no regret about his decision. The American soldiers had shown kindness to his people when they didn't have to. They had provided medical care and food supplies without asking for anything in return. When those same soldiers faced death, Ahmad could not stand by and watch them be slaughtered by fighters who had brought nothing but fear and suffering to his region. The journey back to his village took Ahmad nearly 4 hours, moving carefully through mountain paths to avoid Taliban patrols that were now searching the entire area. His shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, but the pain remained constant and his strength was fading. Several times he had to rest behind rocks when he heard voices or vehicle engines in the distance. When Ahmad finally reached his family's small farm on the outskirts of the village, the sun was setting behind the mountains. His mother, Fatima, was feeding chickens in the yard when she saw her son approaching. She immediately noticed the blood on his shirt and the exhausted expression on his face. "Ahmad, what happened to you?" she cried, rushing to embrace her wounded son. "I'm okay, Mother," Ahmad replied weakly. "But we need to talk to Father immediately. We have to leave tonight." Mahmoud Hassan emerged from their small house, having heard his wife's concerned voice. The former Mujahideen fighter took one look at his son's condition and the urgency in his eyes, and immediately understood that something serious had occurred. "Come inside quickly," Mahmoud said, helping Ahmad into their home. "Tell me what happened." Ahmad explained everything that had taken place during the battle by the river. His father listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as he recognized tactical decisions that reflected his own teachings. When Ahmad finished his story, Mahmoud was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of his son's actions. "You did the right thing," Mahmoud finally said, placing a hand on Ahmad's good shoulder. "Those American soldiers helped our people when they needed assistance. Honor required you to help them in return. But now we're all in danger," Ahmad replied. "The Taliban will search every house in the region. They'll question everyone about who might have helped the Americans." Mahmoud nodded grimly. "Yes, they will. And they will be especially suspicious of any family with military weapons or men who know how to use them effectively." He looked at his old Soviet rifle, which Ahmad had retrieved, and returned to its hiding place. We have one advantage. No one except our family knows about that rifle or your shooting abilities. Ahmed's mother had been listening to this conversation with growing fear. How long do we have before they come here? She asked. Not long, Mahmoud replied. Taliban fighters will start house-to-house searches tomorrow morning. We need to be gone before dawn. The family spent the night packing only essential supplies and preparing for their escape. Ahmed's younger sister, Maryam, was confused about why they had to leave their home suddenly, but she trusted her parents and asked no questions. Their few sheep and chickens would have to be left behind, along with their small crop fields that represented years of hard work. Just before dawn, the Hassan family began their dangerous journey to a relative's village, 3 days' walk through the mountains. They traveled along paths that Mahmoud knew from his years as a Mujahideen fighter, routes that were unlikely to be patrolled by Taliban forces. As they walked through the pre-dawn darkness, Ahmad kept thinking about the American soldiers he had saved. He wondered if they had made it safely back to their base, and whether their wounded would recover fully. He especially remembered the young medic who had worked so frantically to help his injured teammates, showing the same dedication Ahmad had felt when defending the SEAL team. Meanwhile, at Bagram Air Base, Lieutenant Commander Morrison was debriefing his superior officers about the mission that had gone so disastrously wrong. The intelligence failure that led to the ambush would be investigated thoroughly, but Morrison's primary concern was identifying and thanking their unknown ally. Sir, somebody saved our entire team, Morrison explained to his commanding officer. We were completely surrounded with no way out. Then, this sniper started picking off Taliban fighters from positions we couldn't even see. Whoever it was, they knew that terrain better than anyone and shot like a professional marksman. The Air Force had already conducted bombing runs on the battle site, eliminating the remaining Taliban fighters and destroying their equipment. But there had been no sign of the mysterious sniper who had turned the tide of the engagement. Intelligence analysts were reviewing drone footage and radio intercepts, trying to determine who had intervened on behalf of the American forces. Tyler Brooks, the young Navy medic, had been thinking constantly about their unknown guardian angel. Sir, he said during the debriefing, what if it was just a local person? Someone from one of the villages we've been helping with medical care and supplies. Morrison considered this possibility. His team had indeed conducted several humanitarian missions in the region, providing medical treatment and food assistance to Afghan civilians. It was possible that someone they had helped had decided to return the favor when the Americans faced mortal danger. That would make sense, Morrison agreed. But it was incredibly dangerous for any civilian to get involved like that. Whoever helped us put themselves and their family at serious risk from Taliban retaliation. Back in the mountains, the Hassan family was making good progress toward their destination. They had encountered no Taliban patrols, and Ahmed's shoulder wound was healing well under his mother's careful treatment. But the teenager remained worried about other families in their village who might face questioning and threats from Taliban fighters searching for the mysterious sniper. On their second day of travel, the family encountered other refugees fleeing the same general area. Word had spread quickly about increased Taliban activity and house-to-house searches. Dozens of families were seeking safety with relatives in more distant regions, abandoning their homes and livelihoods to escape potential persecution. An elderly farmer told Mahmoud that Taliban fighters had indeed begun systematic searches of every house in their village and surrounding areas. They're looking for someone who helped American soldiers, the old man explained. Anyone with weapons or military experience is being questioned harshly. Ahmad felt guilty about the suffering his actions had caused for innocent families throughout the region. But his father reminded him that the Taliban's oppressive behavior was the real source of people's suffering, not Ahmed's decision to help soldiers who had shown kindness to their community. Son, you acted with honor and courage, Mahmoud said as they walked along a mountain ridge. The Taliban fighters bring fear and violence wherever they go. The American soldiers brought medical help and food supplies. You chose to support the people who had shown mercy to our neighbors. 3 weeks later, the Hassan family had settled temporarily with Mahmoud's brother in a village far from Taliban influence. Ahmad was helping with farm work while his shoulder finished healing, but he continued to practice his marksmanship skills in the surrounding hills. His experience during the river battle had convinced him that his shooting abilities might be needed again someday. Meanwhile, American intelligence analysts had finally pieced together fragments of information that led them to conclude their mysterious ally had indeed been a local Afghan civilian. Radio intercepts revealed Taliban fighters discussing their search for a village-based sniper, and drone footage showed a single gunman moving through terrain in ways that suggested intimate local knowledge. Lieutenant Commander Morrison submitted a formal recommendation that their unknown helper be considered for recognition if he could ever be safely identified. The SEAL team leader knew that finding and thanking their guardian angel would be difficult and dangerous, but he hoped someday they might be able to repay the debt they owed to the teenager who had emerged from the river to save their lives. Ahmad Hassan never sought recognition or reward for his actions that day. He had simply done what his father's teachings and his own conscience demanded when faced with a choice between standing aside or risking everything to help others. The 17-year-old had transformed from a peaceful village fisherman into a warrior in a matter of hours, then quietly disappeared back into the mountains where his family had lived for generations. But the young Afghan knew he would never forget the battle by the river, or the American soldiers whose lives had depended on his courage and skill. Someday, when peace finally came to his troubled country, Ahmad hoped there might be opportunities to meet those brave men again under better circumstances. Until then, he would continue practicing his marksmanship and helping his family build a new life in their distant mountain refuge, ready to defend innocent people whenever circumstances demanded such action. The story of the teenage sniper who saved an elite SEAL team would eventually become legend among American Special Forces units serving in Afghanistan. Though his identity remained unknown, Ahmad Hassan's courage and skill had proven that heroism could emerge from the most unexpected sources, and that bonds of honor and gratitude could transcend cultural and national boundaries even in the midst of war.